Live button, and now we are live. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So today I have the pleasure of bringing on Dr. Alexander Jarasch. Did I say that correctly, Jarasch? And a lot
Correct.
of fun that we're going to be talking about today, a topic that's very important. So we are going to be looking at data and knowledge management, but for something that's quite important today, which is diabetes, which affects a lot of people around the world. I'm not too sure on the stats of how many people it affects, but I know it affects a lot of people. But Alexander, first of all, I want to welcome you to the show, and I'd love to know where you're calling in from today. I didn't ask you before.
Thanks for having me. I'm sitting here in Munich, where we have the head office from the German Center for Diabetes Research, and as you mentioned, I'm the head of data and knowledge management.
Awesome. I'm going to Munich. I've never been. I've literally been through Munich via a train. It was a very quick trip, but I'm going towards the end of November, so it should be a lot of fun to see that city. So if you've got any recommendations,
Definitely, it's a really nice city.
Yeah, it's a cool place to have this base. So how did you get started in all this then? Where did your story begin? Have you always been in like the scientific research field? Have you always been in the machine learning field? Have you been more in the academia? Where did your journey start, and how did you get the passion for this and falling into what you're in now? How did it all start?
So my background is bioinformatics, which is developing algorithms and software for biological or biomedical problems.
Yeah.
And did my PhD in biochemistry for 3D modeling of molecules, and
Nice.
have some background also in the industry. I worked for Roche Pharma before, and there I developed some machine learning techniques. My story here with when we talk about graphs and graph technology in general, this journey started 2017 when I started the position at the German Center for Diabetes Research.
Nice. That's really cool. So it's been a interesting journey that you had, and I guess you got like a lot of experiences going from like Roche and to kind of educational side and back into it. Has there been anything that you've seen or any trends that you've seen through your research that have really kind of changed your way of thinking with regards to how AI and ML and these techniques are really helping us in the scientific field? Because it's so broad. Like I look at it and I'm just like, from drug discovery to detecting it. What have you seen? I'd love to know what you've seen. If there's been any big like aha moments for you, Alexander.
Yeah. So I must say I'm not using machine learning and AI so much, because many of these, let's say, techniques or algorithms are statistics or advanced statistics. So when I worked for Roche some years ago, I did some what you call machine learning now. So you learn from data, and the more data you feed in, the algorithm gets better and better, and the predictions.
Yeah.
But I must say this field of machine learning or computer-aided drug discovery or studies in clinical trials, this changed a lot in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years. And when we talk about, or specifically me, when I'm talking about machine learning, I'm very much focused on graphs, which become there later, and I can scheme here a little bit why I'm doing graphs and not relational databases. But I see this trend coming more and more, and we see that in other industries, right? In the car industry, or autonomous car driving, or we see that in supply chains, where you want to predict or recommend something, and you want to the needle haystack in your supply chain. So this is all very much dependent on algorithms now, right?
Yeah, very interesting. It's very. And how come so to walk me through, because I'm not too familiar, and anyone in our audience, so we do have a lot of data engineers that will be much more clued up than me. I'm always very transparent to say, look, I'm not an expert in the field of AI and data and cloud. I just kind of look at it from a very top level view. So why is it? I don't know if you personally, or maybe for German Center for Diabetes Research, what is that goal or reason you're using graph databases, and how is it kind of helping? What's the whole story behind that?
That's a very good question, and this is the start of my position there. So my task is to bring data together, structure data, harmonize it, so that we can use or reuse data that we acquired in our research field.
Yeah.
And as you can see that here in my background, this is a graph. So to the people that do not know what a graph is, basically it's a mathematical object.
Yeah.
So all these circles there, I don't know where you see these circles here, all these people, they are called nodes. and the lines in between are called relationships or connections. And this is another schema compared to relational databases where you structure your data in columns and rows, right? And this is what most of the people do. They have Excel sheets, or they have databases like Oracle or other relational databases where they try to store the data pretty much I would say in a non-connected way, because you have to join a lot of tables or a lot of Excel sheets from different data sources together in order to get the bigger picture. One very easy example is that your health is not only there's not only data from your doctor, but it's maybe also from your behavior or from your diets or from your environmental research, environmental factors, right? And this is what we bring here together in graph databases, which brought me to Neo4j, basically graph technology, because here we are storing directly these connections when we have these connections or these relationships here between the spots. And this is usually the data model that a researcher or a doctor or a scientist would draw you on a whiteboard.
Yeah, got you. And I guess that makes it a lot better. Well, you've kind of said it already, but for analytics, it kind of helps you with analyzing that and looking at the patterns. And I'd imagine for diabetes, correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd be looking for patterns to see what leads to diabetes and what type of diabetes. And would that be right?
Exactly. So that's one part here. I must say that relational databases and graph databases are isoformic, meaning that you can transform the one to the other or the other way around. So basically, you can have the same data in both worlds. But I must say it's much more intuitive, and especially for the non-computer scientists to work with graph models, because they are so intuitive. And so I don't know if you say visually, because you see directly the data and how it's connected. And that's a big difference. And to your question, what we are doing, just to briefly mention some of the use cases. So we try to connect our internal data, which is basically patients' data, very sensitive data, with data from outside, so from public research or from other data sources.
That's really cool. That's like a mixture between closed data and open source data to see what correlation.
Exactly. And you can see it from one to the other end. So we want to connect the external world with our internal, or the internal world with our external knowledge. Second thing is that what we do is for the case of type 2 diabetes, which is mainly because of alcohol, too much sugar, too much fat, and no physical sports. So we see that patients are responding to the one or the other strategy of, let's say, a diet or maybe a therapy or diagnosis. When we think back like 10 or 20 years, it was type 2 diabetes is the diabetes of elder people. It's not. Basically, 2/3 of the type 2 diabetics are in their working age. So we have a huge problem in our society. That we have basically younger people also as us, they are suffering from diabetes, and it's a metabolic disease. It's very complex. It's highly connected. And that's why we try to subphenotype. We call it subphenotyping, or in terms of technical clustering or classification. Put those patients to different subgroups and try to learn more of the subgroup and how to react on the subgroup, or maybe how to predict a certain outcome.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's kind of. Do you work with, so just the DZD? Do you work with like other, I guess they're called agencies, or other research centers from other countries? So do you like cross share and like look at correlations between what might be happening? Because I don't know, like culturally, things will happen in terms of like eating patterns, or like I'm just speaking from my own personal. A lot of my mates that moved to Australia, they're in very good shape and they're living very like healthy, like outdoors, like going lifestyle, compared to some people that or cultures that I know, such as America, where it's not so much like that. But do you share that kind of understanding to get correlations as well?
Absolutely. So we are a German federal institute for basically the research on diabetes, also in animal models. But of course, we have international collaborations with other partners where we try to correlate or try to compare different events in our studies. And it can be clinical studies on the human side, but can be also basic research in your vessels or in little tubes, but can be also animal models like fruit flies or mice, because we can learn a lot from animal models. And then we try to deduce this information to the human system, or the other way around, because in most cases it's very unethical to do clinical trials.
Yeah, of
and
course.
so you go on the animal model, and then you want to translate that back, because it's not 100% the same. So you have to translate back to the human system.
Yeah, it's cool. And that's quite cool as well, because I guess the word is like a data first scheme or a bottom up pattern, right? Because then you look at it from how does it affect before you even get to the humans, you've got some sort of pattern to understand and know it, right?
Exactly. And this is where graphs come again, and it's very, very different from relational databases. We have very heterogeneous data. It's very unstructured, so it's much easier to integrate that into a graph.
Yeah.
And second, if you see that again here in the background, we as humans, we see patterns like graphs. So is something connected? Is it the same size? Do we have, I don't know, 25 nodes to the one or the other model? And so we are visually comparing patterns that are basically a graph. And this is why we are doing graph technology and using also algorithms on top of this graph database.
Yeah, that's really cool. And do you use what kind of graph databases do you use, if I can ask? Are you or maybe what are you a fan of before, if you can't tell us what you're using, but what are you a fan of? Are you a fan of like Neo4j, or you're a fan of MySQL? What's your preference, or what do you use, if you can say?
So to be honest, and I always say about my own, I'm too stupid for join operations. That's why I really hate relational databases. But let's say it like this: if you have your relational database or your relational data, it has a certain sense, and for many reasons, it makes a lot of sense to use a relational database. But once you get to a very complex or very connected problem, you should rather use a graph database. And in our case, we chose Neo4j because it's open source, and we use the Cypher query language, which is very, very intuitive. But there are other graph vendors out there as well, so you can choose.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of open source. I'm glad that you said you are as well, because, or it seems like you said you are, because it's like I look at businesses, I look at like anything you're trying to do, like we're open source. Anything that you do, like we're open source to a degree, but like I always use the Android versus iPhone model, like the amount of apps that you can get on Android compared to iPhone, because they're just very open and they're very quick to fix bugs and they're very quick to fix problems. And I think it's a much better model, right? It's I love it.
It is, and yeah, that's why we basically choose it, because it's open source.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And so did you think that, or what I'd like to ask is, when you look at these models that you're building, is there anything that you've really seen that's been quite a big like aha moment, or something that you've done from using graph models? And before you use graph models, what did you do? Like, when did this whole inception come? Has it always been that way, or was there something you were using before, or what kind of shifted you towards that?
As I said, from my background, of course, I started with relational databases, and it was like, I wouldn't say slow, but it's like you have to do data separate from each other, and then you have to join it again. So that changed now with Graph. And as I said, in 2017, we basically started this very huge project of our Graph database, which is currently 1 billion nodes and several billion edges. So we're not talking about small databases. It's a huge one. And maybe another reason why we do that is because I guess that's true basically for most of these widespread diseases like cancers or diabetes or lung diseases or Alzheimer's. They are all connected somehow. And this is what people or scientists realized already several years ago. So there are connections. And I can only talk here from the diabetes point of view. But diabetes is connected to stroke and heart attacks. So 30% of all the heart attacks and strokes are mainly caused by a diabetes. and people didn't know that. So that's very connected to each other. We don't know why and how yet, but there is a connection. Same is true for Alzheimer's, for liver cancer, and also to COVID. So we see that diabetic patients have a much higher risk to get infected and a much higher risk to die. So there's also connection. And I am seeing that from a data perspective, I'm seeing that everything is connected in this graph. We don't know how, but we can use graph algorithms to help us find these patterns or find these connections. And these can be clusters, these can be shortest path, all the paths. We call that in computer science maximum common subgraph. So you're looking for graph patterns that are the same, but they are the how do you say, the highest common subgraph that have two models in common. So we use graph algorithms because, as I said, this graph is way too huge to explore manually.
Yeah. That's wild, because you think the amount of things that are connected to it, like slightly off topic, but one of like some of my friends and my parents are starting to use saunas and stuff because it lowers your heart attack risk by 63%. One of the studies found. Now, obviously, there's multiple studies. I'm not saying that's a fixed figure. That's just one study that's done so much research, and obviously other studies will be doing other research that might kind of bring that figure down. But it proves that it's something that can help. And I think with, when you get these illnesses, or you get something that happens to you, or you get something that makes you weaker, I guess your body has to work harder, and that just naturally makes it more prone to having a heart attack or getting cancer as part of diabetes, because your body's working on a weaker immune system or a weaker body, or it's having to work harder at a more rapid rate. And I always think those things can sometimes be put down. I'm not scientific. I'm not saying that's true, but I always just think my own personal feeling is like, that's maybe why it's happening.
Yeah.
But surely you're using so what for trend analysis? You're saying you have all these billions of nodes and stuff, which is wild. Like, I've looked at nodes before from a hardware point of view, from looking at graphs that need to be used for systems or software solutions and all that kind of way, and that we having all these nodes. But I've never looked at it from a kind of way of the healthcare side. How do you do your trend analysis? Are you using AI and ML, or what does that play a role in it? How do you do all that if you've got all this traction to track on such a regular basis?
Absolutely. Very prominent example is a publication from our scientists. They are starting from the iris scans of the eye, because you get diabetic retinopathy, and you can clearly see that in the screen of your eyes, and you can use AI to forecast that. So that's pretty much the most common application, where we use image recognition on several million pictures, and then you go to your doctor, and they are comparing that to this model, and then they say, okay, you will get this or that, and you can take the one or the other drug, or maybe you can avoid it with a diet or so. So this is one of the use cases. Others are the subphenotyping that we are using, ML or AI. There's another, because you mentioned clinical studies, and this is what we are using here a lot. I wanted to mention that lots of this research goes into a dead end, meaning that we write up a scientific publication, which is unstructured data. So on the other, if you are the researcher and want to read about it and want to understand it, you have to read that manually, right?
Yeah.
Am I still on? Okay. So the problem is that you have a bottleneck. You as a human being, you have to read that. But the problem is you cannot read all the clinical studies of all the connected diseases anymore, because it's way too much. So that's why we're using some kind of machine learning techniques called natural language processing, where you put into your text and let the system analyze what is relevant, context specific, can recognize named entities, and then gives us back, in our case, a graph where the researcher has let's say a pre-calculated outcome. You condense then your let's say 100,000 clinical studies to the bits and pieces, to points together, And since we are doing that in the graph, we automatically connect these named entities or these relationships. So the user, in this case, the medical doctors, they can scan much more clinical trials with much more data than ever before.
Cool. And it kind of, you can use all that data to like feed back to give to the doctors and to give to people when they're treating people for diabetes or diagnosing them, or however that process looks like, to say this is maybe the best recommended action, right? Or this is the best,
Exactly.
if it's some other disease, like this is the best prescription, or this is the best like course of action to take with you, right?
Exactly. And in terms of COVID, we did a little exercise, maybe to give you this example, because I found that really prominent. So we analyzed the sentiment of a clinical trial text from a press release saying that this drug is working or that drug is not working. There was a former American president who thought that this malaria drug works and we don't have a pandemic. And we could clearly see the correlation between the sentiment of a text that has been analyzed automatically, so no human interaction, which is always connected to this malaria drug, and this was rather negative up to neutral, and compared to another drug, remdesivir, by Gilead, where these outcomes of clinical trials were much more positive. And so if you present that to a researcher or to a medical doctor, I mean, you have to go into the data to understand that clearly, but it gives you already quite a condensed view on several thousand clinical studies, on several thousands of documents. So that's what I wanted to say, that we can support our doctors with clinical decision making made by AI. But in the end, we don't want to substitute them. We just want to give them support by computer systems.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. So I just want to back up quickly because it's been in my head since you said that. So you were saying that you use data integration, right? So you look at different, so sometimes you use open source and sometimes you use very like highly privatized and very personal information to look at what you can do and how you can do it. So if you're looking at data integration, is this the correct, guy, steer me right here if I'm going wrong, but you might have molecular data and then you might have patient data. How do you integrate both of them? Because you're saying as well that you have unstructured data. How does that all work? Or is there like a technique or method that you've seen that works best, or that I wouldn't say recommend, but something that you've seen that people should look into? What do you think?
I think that's one of the best questions, because this clearly shows you why I'm loving graphs so much, why I'm so enthusiastic to that, and why I think it's very important. Because we start with the user being the non-computer scientist.
Yeah.
And they are drawing on the whiteboard. They are usually drawing graphs, as I said, and then we start the data integration, saying, okay, there's a patient. Okay, we draw a node. There's a patient. Okay, then we want to store the name, or we want to store the age, or the weight, or whatever to it.
Yeah.
And then we have, let's say, experiments is another node, because we are performing experiments on this patient. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's another experiment, let's say a screening of your eye, as we had it in this other experiment. Okay, so the screening of the eye is another node, which is connected to this specific patient. Then we can integrate more and more data to the nodes and edges, and that generates the graph automatically. And cool thing is that everything is like interactive. So whenever we do a query to the database, usually in relational databases, you get back a table or you get back a list. Okay, and then of million entries and so on. Here, in the graph world, everything is interactive, meaning that we can click on a node, we can drag that around, we can click what is connected to this node, because, oh, wow, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. What's behind it? And then you can click on that, and everything what's connected opens. And that's a big difference. I mean, of course, you can write an application based on a relational database doing the same, but it's not that easy. And also, coming back to the data integration, since you have to put everything in tables and joining tables and intermediate tables and foreign keys and primary keys, it's extremely complicated to understand the data model. And of course, you need at least several data scientists or computer scientists to translate that data model to your user. In the graph world, that is completely different. And that makes data integration very, very easy, because it is the same model that the user draws on a whiteboard. And that makes it super easy.
Yeah. I love it, man, because like I love the scientific field. I love the science field. I love what you're working in, because the main trend, I haven't spoken to many, but everyone that I have spoke to within the research, science, and healthcare field, they always go into a situation thinking, how do I know I'm right? And I love it. Like they're never looking for a right or wrong answer. They're just looking for like some sort of gesture or something. I don't know what it is they're looking for, but they're never looking to say that's right, that's wrong. Maybe those people are out there that work in that field, but I've never come across one. It doesn't sound like you're like one either, because you just want to see, well, how do I know I'm right, or how do I know this is going to work? And you're constantly testing, constantly testing, constantly testing.
Exactly.
I think it's a great mindset to shift. And I think if more businesses had that kind of mindset of what researchers and mainly what people in the healthcare profession do, I think the businesses would explode much more where they are, because it's just never looking at it as a right or wrong answer. It's looking at it as, well, what is, like, why is it that way, rather than is it right or wrong. It's a very cool way.
And you're pointing out a very interesting point. So we are always proving ourselves over and over again.
Yeah.
And this is what also the graph model is, because we are constantly adapting the graph model, either more granular or less granular, because when we need the granularity, we go in this direction. But we can also do, in case of Neo4j, we can do graph projections. So they are so-called graph projections. So you have a projection from your part of the data into your memory, and then you can do machine learning into it, and can be a completely different data model. And then once you analyze something and have a result, you can write that directly back into this graph, which makes it very, very powerful to introduce or to reduce some of the connections. Let's say we are, if you think about Google Maps, it would be you try to find the best way from London to Glasgow, and you go, I don't know, the best way Google Maps chooses, right? But there can be new detours that being shorter or the direct way. So for some of the queries, we are creating special relationships that are kind of shortcuts, which makes the query for this specific use case even faster. And both worlds, so the long way and the short way, are living in the same database. It's super cool, because we can then optimize several use cases and bring the query to much better performance.
Yeah. Have you had like any examples of things like correlation points that you've really noticed that really can induce or bring on diabetes quicker? Like, I don't know, like the pandemic, I always say, in a business way or in medical field, like it must have surely swung a lot of predictions and swung a lot of like graph tables, because although you could kind of see it coming, and I think it was Bill Gates in like 2014 with his TED talk, whatever year it was, where he said like it's coming, like it's going to be somewhere in the next 10 to 15 years. He was like, it's just inevitable. You can see everything building up through patterns, but we don't know when. But obviously, as soon as it hit, like I was in a business and they were doing all these cash flow predictions, doing all the predictions for new sales. And obviously the pandemic hit and it didn't happen anymore. Like it completely changed. And I wonder like if it completely changed, or has there been, I'm not saying use the pandemic, but has there been situations where it's completely changed your kind of verdict or your kind of grasp to say, didn't realize that would correlate between that, if that's a well-worded question.
So I think for an outcome to a patient, that's too early, because usually that takes, you have a hypothesis from your machine learning technique, and then you go into the lab or into the clinical trial to verify that. So we are not there yet. Is that we are speeding up our internal processes by, let's say, the smaller data sets by 20 times and the larger data set by 12,000 times. And there we have experimental data from animal models, but also from human. And we try to identify, let's say, genes or gene patterns or combinations of genes that are different from the healthy person or the healthy animal to the sick one. And with the graph database, we could speed up this process, as I said, to several 10,000 times. And I think this speeds up the research, which is good, but also saves a lot of money and a lot of, do you say, nerves for that? When people are sitting there and, like it's tedious work, it's error prone when you do that over and over again as a scientist sitting in the office and clicking through Excel sheets and copying and pasting. So this is, we get rid of this, and we have everything in the graph and saying, okay, this is my input data, just calculate that and just give me the signals there. And this process is much faster now and much more streamlined. So maybe this is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you mentioned it there. So if I can ask, what's your kind of thinking, or what's the DZD's kind of thinking? So if you look at protein engineering, antibody engineering, and I don't know, enzyme engineering or enzyme design, maybe looking at an enzyme and how it's designed and how these can change between people. And I think culture has a big thing on that, because someone's blood work or someone's anatomy is going to be a lot different if they've grown up in a very hot country compared to a very cold country. I think that's correct. I think that's a good example. How does that all correlate with what you're doing for research and doing for the graph side and doing for the kind of getting to testing phases and getting to clinical trials? What role do they all play, or is there one that's more important than the other? My guess is probably not, because they all interloop. But yeah, what do you think?
So we're going now back to my past, right? Because I did protein engineering and antibody engineering before, and that's my own perspective on that now. So I think that in the former, on the last 10 years, researchers were more focused on their studies. Like the cancer guys only on cancer, the diabetes guys only on diabetes. I don't know, the antibody engineering only on antibody engineering. And now the world is changing, because we see that there are many things that influence the outcome. Let's say the diet or the weather, whatever, right? We also have a very, very interesting collaboration with people from San Diego, and they are correlating and integrating weather forecast data with viral infection data somewhere in the middle of the US. And whenever there's a drought, 3 weeks after, they have a high infection rate of people. So they are not only integrating, I don't know, the diet of a patient, or maybe what they scan in the blood or in the retina. They are also integrating data from weather forecasts, right? And I think that makes the world more complex. Of course, we have to gather more data. We have to acquire more data, basically. But it also makes the model more accurate, I would say. And I think that this is coming more and more, because so many things are connected to each other.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. It's just really awesome to see like how it. And I saw that you wrote about this in Forbes as well, right? How did you find that? Has any of your views changed in like the past 3 years or past 4 years to what you initially thought, or has there been any trends that you're like, I was actually completely wrong about this? I don't know.
Well, basically, the basic idea is still the same, and there's proof, because many of the other widespread diseases are kind of very similar. It's connected to other diseases. It's connected to your behavior and so on. And I think this trends goes more towards this direction, to gather more data, gather more unstructured data. Which is the problem, that we cannot analyze that by hand or with your calculator. So you have to use machine learning techniques, statistics, AI, whatever. But makes the forecast or the product much better, right? I know that we are burning a lot of CPU hours for that, but at least we want to be better, right? And I think so. You mentioned that interview, which is 4 years ago. And I think this basic idea just growed and just progressed. So the vision was to have a connected data. Not only, maybe that's another point, we're not only storing in this graph database, we're not only storing raw data, we're also storing metadata. And I think since Edward Snowden, we know that we can analyze a lot from metadata, right? From the
that story's wild about Edward Snowden and everything that went on. Have you watched the film and read the book and stuff? Read his book?
I read the book. Book, and then I listened to the audiobook, which was even more interesting, because then I listened to that over and over again, and I thought, okay, wow, it's interesting when they are analyzing. So when the intelligence calculates something on metadata, where your telephone is and what kind of telephone that is, you can get so much information from that, just not using the raw data but the metadata. And this is also true here in the healthcare sector. And I think we can do much better of standardizing and harmonizing metadata and bring that together, so that we can see where maybe some correlations. And we do this, for example, we do this to standardize our metadata, to find other standardized metadata, maybe across the ocean, somewhere in America, and identifying a scientist that is not in the telephone book, but has an interesting data set or an interesting outcome, and say, okay, maybe we can join these data sets together and make a better forecast, or can learn something about them. So I think metadata is really, really important and extremely underestimated. And I know that it costs a lot of money to gather this metadata and to educate people that they should gather metadata, but I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, I think so, because what you're talking about isn't trying to boost profits and boost certain things. You're trying to keep people alive. And I think when you look at it from that angle, it's, no one wants to have the news. No one wants to be in that GP room being told that they've got cancer. No one wants to be told that their blood pressure's too high and they're at a very severe risk of having heart disease or whatever it might be, whatever situation is, or you've got Alzheimer's. And I think there's nothing wrong with educating people on saying, look, we can only keep you alive and keep you feeling better or get a new drug discovery for you if you share this. I think it's a very important message.
And maybe to give you another example, we internally we call that the Tinder for scientists. So my colleague said the Tinder for scientists. So we are analyzing scientific publications, and as I said, when they were separated, the cancer guys and the diabetes guys, let's say they were studying the same gene from a perspective of cancer and from a perspective of diabetes. They didn't know each other, and of course they could call each other, but using this graph, we have a connection between them, which is the gene. And so we say, okay, here's a match. Maybe you talk to each other because you're working on the same thing. The problem there was that talking about the same thing in this gene protein world is very very difficult, because we have a lot of synonyms and a lot of mapping identifiers, because people are not using standards for that. And so we could integrate all these synonyms and mapping identifiers into the Neo4j database, and then connect that to researchers, and then saying, okay, here's a match, or there's a match, and that's not the big shot of diabetes. That's maybe a scientist somewhere in Bolivia or somewhere in Asia. Maybe you should talk to him or her, because he or she has relevant data for you. And we said that's Tinder for scientists. I don't know if we can use that officially, but that was our internal code name for me.
I love it, man. Like maybe some apps should be created to just like match people on like this, because you're seeing it for like businesses, matching people on business ideas. And there's a great book. I've recommended it a number of times, Alexander, and I love what you're saying, because it's by Ed Catmull and it's called Creativity Inc. And it talks around about Pixar and about all that business that they created in Disney and all that kind of stuff they built up, and Steve Jobs coming in. And Steve Jobs was he came in and it was all very closed, and he was just like, no, fuck this, like we're making it all open, we're doing everything, like I want the CEOs in the room with the bottom level designers. And they do this thing called a brain trust. I think they do it like once a year or once a quarter, or I can't remember how often, but they do it quite regularly. And they give the whole company a day off, and they put them in breakout rooms of like 7-8 people, and they can't be in the same department or same field, or there can only be 2 in the same field or whatever. So you've got a HR person with a video editor, with a animation expert, with a head of department or something. And they come together and they say out of that come some of their best ideas. And they say that's why Pixar picks up so many awards for all their animation films or their films, because they're not siloed and they're not locked in. And I think it's such an important point. And I think COVID's taught a lot of people, like you're saying, you wouldn't be able to understand certain things if that scientist is in the room with that other person, because you don't understand the correlation. And it kind of baffles me, maybe being a bit younger or naive, thinking, but surely that's always the way. So it's an interesting model, man. So it's interesting to see that you're thinking that way as well. But no, a lot of fun. It's good to see how you're building it and what you're doing, especially with all the data and how you're going around with that. And yeah, it's really cool to see the impact that you have. And I guess the cool thing around your job or your role, Alexander, you're always finding new questions, right? You're always
exactly. So it's good that you can answer questions, but usually it raises another question, or maybe 10 new questions, because it's interesting, right? So it's very satisfying. in this kind of data management and also analytics fields, I think it's a good mixture between data management, which can be very, very tough, I would say. But then having this data analytics in order to make your data management better or more efficient, I think this is a very interesting combination. And I think we should have that more supported. Because in many cases, like infrastructure is not well appreciated at all. I mean, nobody talks about Google, that you're Googling stuff, but usually you get smarter because you're Googling and reading, and Google finds something for you, but nobody talks about Google. Nobody talks about databases. Nobody talks about, I mean, we're talking about AI, but nobody talks about the specific algorithms or the specific infrastructure underneath, right? I think we should have more appreciation for the infrastructure part, because this usually you don't hear anything unless you have problems with, or if it's not working, then you know that something is not working.
Not waiting till it's not working. Basically, you wait till it's not working, and then you start questioning it rather than trying to question ahead, which is a common mistake, which I'm guilty of as well, time to time. So I'd love to ask you one more question, Alexander. You mentioned earlier using obviously using graph charts and everything to do with that, and looking at data, and you're looking at various different fields and using open source, but looking slightly more, and this is more from just your personal point of view. You mentioned that you're using vision and everything, and I think a lot of the new innovations coming out, like eye technology and stuff, so the glasses are coming and they're going to be insane. I can't wait to get my hands on them. And I've literally, at the moment, I've got a pair of Google glasses that I got.
Oh, nice.
Very cool to see, and they look a bit strange when you put them on and stuff, but they present like an AR out here, and you can kind of see from a commercial perspective. But is it, like if you use Apple glasses, for example, one example I got was you're wearing them, and all of a sudden someone next to you has a heart attack. You can know where the AED device is, and you can get there very quickly. You don't need to use first response. You can think it will locate it for you, give you a graph, and give you a graphic of where you are in a shopping center. For your field, is there anything, like you mentioned, the vision software that you're trying to build into it? Is there anything you're seeing or you're excited about that's going to come in, or that's coming in, or that you're using that you didn't before consider, or that you would like to see being come through? What do you think?
Yes, so depending on the use case, we have different visualizations that are interactive or that are not interactive. But in general, since we have graphs as a model to represent that and to have that interactive, I think this is a big game changer. I have some colleagues who wrote a driver for Neo4j to the Microsoft HoloLens, and I always wanted to try out that, to have the graph just in front of you.
That'd be cool.
To traverse the graph by, like just flying like a wing commander through it, like on a simple that would be cool. When I think back of my career, when I did 3D modeling of molecules, which is basically also a graph because all these atoms are connected, that would be interesting. Diving through these active sites of proteins and re-engineer this with a kind of a glove, and I always say we played Lego with it. Right, because these amino acids in these proteins are basically little bricks, and if you take another brick or another color, it changes the features of this protein. So that would be a really cool feature, to have this 3D vision into proteins. But also, when we come back now here on my level, clinical trials and data management, to traverse or even tie or I think that would be interesting to have either AR or VR glasses, and to interact with the graph.
And like I think it's in the film Amazing Spider-Man 2, maybe. So it's in the film there where he basically pulls up and he keeps trying to run the trials on the mouse. I think I remember the scene correctly, and he keeps running it, and he has it all visualized in front of him, and he keeps changing. And I'm thinking, like, you could change drugs, like change the percentage of how much of a certain formula's in it, and does it work? Give it a green light, red light. That'd be cool, right?
Yeah. There's a very cool game by David Baker in Seattle. He's a scientist doing protein structure prediction, and they used PlayStations and designed a game for this problem of protein folding, where you as a human being can understand that, and you have little rubbers and little feathers and little screws, and then you can basically model the protein and how do you say, automatically and immediately update it. You get the least free energy of this protein, and the goal is to basically build the protein structure with the lowest free energy. Super cool thing. But coming back to graphs, I think it would be really cool to have a lens or glasses where you have your analysis right in front of your eye, but also have this interactive thing where you have to combine gloves or something, or a mouse, where you can pull or push information away, or you can pull it towards you. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think so, because using these as an example, you can look around, and if you're not looking at the right place, it won't move with you. So you could, for example, Alexander, be looking at I don't know, I'm using a very loose example here. You could be looking at a massive table that you're working on, and you can look over to the left and you'd have the graph there, and you look over to the right, have another graph there, and you'll be able to see how they correlate. But you'd also much more collaboratively have another scientist or have another person in the room with you that's in another field, and they'll be able to look at you, and you'll both be able to chat, look at it in real time, and say, well, how does that work? How does that change? And you save space, which is an added bonus. You don't have all the computers around and everything, so you've just got basically an open table. I think it's really cool, like what you'll be able to do. And I think
that would have been also a really cool use case where you bring, in my case, medical doctors together, and then you connect them, obviously, in the real world, and then having this data or this graph in between and saying, okay, what do you think about this and that? And you can interactively push and pull and discuss about things, and that would be a really cool scenario. Yeah.
Maybe when we're next chatting, it'll be a reality. So you'll be able to walk me through it in real time with you in person, Alexander. I'll be like,
that would be cool. That would be cool.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, Alexander. It's been a lot of fun, and I knew this was going to be a great one. And this is, I hope the audience has learned a lot. But most importantly, I've learned a lot, which is why I do this. I mean, it's great that other people get to learn, but from a selfish point of view, I love to interview and see what you're doing. And just a massive thank you for sharing everything you have today, and really appreciate your time, Alexander.
Thanks for having me. I hope I could convince some people to graph technology. In our case, it's Neo4j, but also to connect with other people, because I think this is very, very important to bring people together, to connect, to exchange data, be open basically to new things. Otherwise, we are not innovators anymore, right?
100% stand behind that. I always say open source is the best way, because it's just connecting people. As you get more people involved, you get more ideas, you get more questions, you get better questions, more people, better questions. So 100% agree on that note as well, Alexander. And a lot of fun. So anyone else watching, I really appreciate you joining in today. And as always, let us know who you want us to bring on the show next. We're always looking for the best people to bring on to talk to you around topics such as Alexander's explained today. And really appreciate you joining. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Bye.